folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your increasingly reluctant prophet. I'd like to discuss willful blindness with you today because I'm really getting appalled at how, I'm not just willing, my fellow Canadians demand that they be kept in the dark. I can't understand it, and I can assure you of this. Even though I jokingly call myself the reluctant prophet, there's not a thing that I know that's based on Gnostic mysteries. I do not possess some secret knowledge that only I can possess. Anything that I'm about to share with you can be known by anyone who cares to investigate. So I am constantly astounded that despite the obvious failures of fiduciary easing, centrally planned economies, the buyout of the big banks back in 2008 and 9 due to the orchestrated fake mortgage crisis, the nefarious and questionable origins of COVID, its relationship to the CCP, and the subsequent failures of its mitigation protocols, the mRNA shots which are known to have resulted in injuries, climate alarmism without solid science to justify the failed measures used to address so-called climate change, just to name but a few globally choreographed disasters. Few appear to care to analyze the common and consistent root causes for what we now know to be the murderous failures responsible for decimating the global economy, while transferring vast sums of wealth to the very people who have orchestrated these constructed crises. An example. The most significant taxpayer-funded buyout of big banks happened during the 2008 financial crisis, when the U.S. government launched the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, under the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, signed into law on October the 3rd, 2008. What TARP did? Authorized $700 billion to stabilize the financial system, initially aimed to buy toxic mortgage assets, but shifted to injecting capital directly into banks. Major recipients included Citigroup, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, among others. Long-term impacts. Over 700 banks received investments totaling $236 billion. Most of the money was eventually repaid, with the government earning a modest profit overall. However, some banks never fully repaid their obligations, and a few still owe dividends. In Canada, Canadian banks also received support during the crisis, with reports suggesting up to $114 billion in government assistance, though much of it was less transparent and was not officially labeled as a bailout. Of course, that happened under Harper. Willful ignorance is the enemy of addressing an orchestrated takedown of peace, order, and good government. Willful ignorance is the conscious choice to remain unaware of something. It is driven by a combination of factors, including maintaining a positive self-image, social pressures, and the desire to avoid uncomfortable truths or potential negative consequences. People may choose ignorance to avoid guilt, appearing to be selfish, or to conform to social expectations. Moreover, every social collectivist ideology, from fascism, Nazism, so-called democratic socialism, postmodernism, cultural Marxist critical theory, Maoism, Marxist-Leninism, Stalinism, etc., cannot function without it. Simply can't. Here's a more detailed breakdown. Number 1, maintaining a positive self-image. People often prefer to believe they are good, moral, and competent. Willful ignorance allows them to avoid information that might challenge this self-perception. For example, someone might choose not to know the negative cost to humans and the environment of the products they buy to avoid feeling guilty about their consumption. This is why so-called green energy has enormous environmental costs. 2, social pressures and norms. Social environments can enforce ignorance by discouraging challenging conversations or by promoting conformity. Individuals may avoid information that contradicts the prevailing views of their social group to maintain social harmony and belonging. For example, if a group of friends all believe a certain officially state-sanctioned theory, someone might choose to remain ignorant of evidence contradicting that theory to avoid conflict. 3, avoiding uncomfortable emotions and consequences. Learning about negative or unpleasant realities can evoke emotions like guilt, regret, or fear. Willful ignorance can be a way to avoid these negative emotions by remaining unaware of the situation. For instance, someone might choose not to learn about the socioeconomic impacts of their beliefs to avoid feeling responsible for government overreach and authoritarianism. Similarly, some individuals might avoid learning about the consequences of their actions, even if those actions negatively impact others, to avoid feeling guilty or responsible. 4, the appeal of simplicity and convenience. Learning new information takes time and effort. Willful ignorance can be a shortcut, allowing individuals to avoid the cognitive burden of processing complex information. This can be particularly tempting when the consequences of ignorance are not immediately apparent. It's just, human beings really are. Number 5, power and control. In some cases, willful ignorance can be a way to exert power or control, either over oneself or others. For example, a company might deliberately obscure information about conflicts with favorable treatment it receives from the state to avoid being held accountable for these conflicts of interest. 6, social and political context. In politically charged environments, willful ignorance can be used to support specific radical narratives or liberal agendas. For instance, a political party might downplay the severity of a problem to avoid taking responsibility for problems their policies have created to rally support for these very destructive policies. In essence, willful ignorance is often a coping mechanism, a way for individuals to navigate a complex and sometimes uncomfortable world. It has significant negative consequences, both for individuals and for society as a whole. Importantly, we need to examine willful blindness toward government corruption, conflicts of interest, and emerging authoritarianism, particularly, but not exclusively, from the radical left. As Dr. James Lindsay points out, we are now seeing the emergence of the woke right. Although this might seem to be a powerful critique, it is one that echoes concerns raised by thinkers across the political spectrum. The idea that justice is used as a rhetorical shield, not to foster pluralism, but to enforce ideological conformity, is a recurring theme in debates about radical movements. Here's how some analysts unpack that dynamic. Justice as a tool for ideological control. Yascha Mounk, in The Identity Trap, argues that a new progressive ideology has emerged that prioritizes identity over universal values. He warns that this can lead to progressive separatism, where policies are justified not by their outcomes, but by their alignment with identity-based justice. Monk describes how standpoint theory and intersectionality, while originally insightful, have been weaponized to silence dissent by claiming only certain groups have access to the truth. Institutional power and conformity. The Democratic Socialists of America, or the DSA, platform calls for sweeping reforms, from abolishing capitalism to eliminating police and prisons. Critics argue that while framed as justice, these proposals often reject dissenting views and promote a single ideological framework. Some radical left caucuses within the DSA even advocate for a revolutionary popular assembly where only parties that accept the new order are allowed to operate, a vision that raises alarms about democratic pluralism. Now, the paradox of inclusion. Monk also highlights how identity-focused politics can paradoxically exclude rather than include. For example, prioritizing racial equity in vaccine distribution led to policies that, unintentionally, cost more lives overall, including among the most marginalized groups. When justice becomes a means to enforce ideological purity, it risks becoming authoritarian in practice, which is why radicals only use claims of justice to install absolute conformity to their agenda. When justice is weaponized to enforce ideological purity, it stops being justice at all. It becomes a tool of exclusion, control, and fear. Here's what tends to unfold. Justice will lose its neutrality. Impartiality erodes. Legal systems begin favoring one worldview, punishing dissent rather than wrongdoing. Due process suffers. Accusations based on ideological deviation may override evidence or fairness. Rise of purity spirals. Increasing extremism. Movements may reward ever stricter adherence, pushing out moderates and silencing nuance. Self-policing communities. People fear being labeled impure, leading to conformity and suppression of honest dialogue. I saw this most blatantly in Norway when I lived there from 2012 until mid-2015. And then when I came home, I saw these same wicked ideas had infiltrated Canadian thinking, particularly through our universities. Intellectual suppression. Free speech declines. Dissenting voices are silenced, not debated. Critical thinking fades. Ideological loyalty replaces inquiry and skepticism. Historical consequences. Authoritarian regimes, such as Stalin's purges, Mao's Cultural Revolution, and Nazi Germany, all pursued ideological purity with devastating human cost. Social fragmentation. Families, communities, and institutions fracture under pressure to conform, just as I've seen in my wife's family. Her own children won't speak with her because of this social fragmentation, because of her children's demand for ideological purity to social collectivism. They disgust me. And I mourn for my wife, who laments her children's situation and prays for them constantly, as I do. Although I have a little less use for their nonsense than their mother does. Because as a mother, of course, she wishes to mother them, but they've rejected her. This is a sin so grievous, given my wife's nature, that I can't even describe how disgusting I find their behavior. So justice versus ideology. Justice should be about fairness, accountability, and protecting constitutionally guaranteed rights, rather than enforcing dogma that protect the officially sanctioned narrative of the Prime Minister's office or any other state office. When it becomes a purity test, it risks becoming a mirror image of the very oppression it claims to fight, which I have seen repeatedly firsthand. So here's my summation, and you know where I'm going to end with this as a Christian. Frankly, Canada has become an example of a nation where built on meaningless yet costly platitudes that have repeatedly and consistently achieved the opposite of what our government has sworn that these policies would achieve. Yet, like a dog returning to eat its vomit, we simply restore known corrupt liars to power. Yes, we do. That's how Marxist Carney got into office. A critical mass of Canadians are obviously incapable of asking why this is the case. Since we refuse to look at what should be obvious. As I said, I'm not in possession of any mystery here. These are all documented, well-known realities. Since we choose to call our failures successes, we are fully deserving of the ruin our willful blindness has wreaked upon us. It appears, at least to me, that we will continue to beat ourselves until morale improves, or the beaten succumb to their own well-deserved demise due to their foolhardy ways. People will do anything rather than repent and turn to Christ. Let us see where your virtual signaling will get you on that day of judgment, when all, including me, will stand before the King of Kings to give account for what we have done while still in this body. 2 Corinthians 5:10 from the King James Version states, "For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. I for one have much to answer for, which is why I choose to repent of my ways, now, before it is too late, for I have wandered far from God." Hebrews 3:15-17, again from the King James. "While it is said, Today if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? Will your carcass be one who falls in the wilderness? Or will you give heed to the divine calling? If you hear his voice, harden not your heart. For today is the day of redemption.